Right, let's talk about trade, specifically the massive, sometimes baffling economic dance between India and the United States. These two behemoths, democracies no less, are major trading partners. Think of it like a giant, sprawling marketplace, bustling with goods, services, and a whole lot of haggling. The sheer volume of stuff moving between these two nations is staggering, impacting jobs, businesses, and the price of your morning chai or your American-made smartphone, if you're into that sort of thing. It's a relationship that's economically vital, politically significant, and as we'll see, prone to the occasional, shall we say, spirited disagreement over who pays what for whose widgets. This isn't just about numbers, it's about livelihoods and national pride, all wrapped up in customs forms. The Indo-US trade relationship, you see, isn't just a footnote in global economics, it's a headline act. In 2024, for instance, bilateral trade clocked in at around a cool $129 billion. Yes, billion with a B. That's a lot of mangoes, medicines, machinery, and software services zipping across the oceans. India, in this particular exchange, even managed a trade surplus of about $45.7 billion with the US. So, India was selling more to America than it was buying, which, as you can imagine, sometimes becomes a bit of a talking point, especially when certain political figures get involved. It's like being at a potluck where one person brings a massive, delicious biryani and the other brings a slightly sad bag of crisps. Someone's gonna notice. This economic interdependence has grown over decades, fueled by shared democratic values, a growing Indian diaspora in the US, and the complementary nature of their economies. India's strength in services and pharmaceuticals, for example, finds a massive market in the US, while American technology and agricultural products seek opportunities in India's burgeoning consumer base. It's a complex web of give and take, a partnership that, when it works smoothly, benefits both sides immensely. But like any long-term relationship, it has its ups and downs, its moments of blissful cooperation and its periods of, well, let's call it constructive tension, often manifested in the charming form of tariffs. And that brings us to the crux of the matter, tariffs. Those pesky taxes on imported goods that can make international trade feel like a game of economic Jenga, one wrong move and the whole thing could wobble. The story of India-US tariffs is a fascinating, sometimes frustrating saga of negotiations, disputes, and the constant push and pull between protecting domestic industries and fostering free trade. It's a dance where the steps keep changing, the music sometimes stops abruptly, and both partners are constantly trying to lead. So buckle up because we're about to dive into this thrilling and occasionally infuriating world of international trade policy. Now let's rewind a bit to the period between 2017 and 2021. Enter the Trump administration, and suddenly, tariffs weren't just a boring footnote in trade agreements. They were front-page news, often announced, it seemed, via early morning tweets. This era marked a significant shift in U.S. trade policy, moving towards a more protectionist stance. In 2018, the U.S. decided to slap hefty tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from several countries, including India. We're talking 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum. The rationale? National security, apparently. Because nothing says secure nation quite like making it more expensive for your industries to buy essential raw materials. This move, understandably, didn't go down too well in New Delhi. India, like many other nations, found itself caught in the crosshairs of America's new tariff-happy approach. But wait, there's more. In 2019, the U.S. took another swing by revoking India's GSP status. GSP, or Generalized System of Preferences, is a scheme where developed countries grant tariff concessions to developing nations. For India, this meant that over $5 billion worth of its exports to the US, which previously enjoyed duty-free access, suddenly faced new import taxes. Think of it as your loyalty card at the local Kirana store suddenly being declared null and void, right when you were about to buy your monthly groceries. The reasons cited for yanking India's GSP benefits were concerns over market access for American companies in India. The U.S. administration felt that India wasn't providing equitable and reasonable access to its markets. So, in a classic trade maneuver, one action led to another. The imposition of steel and aluminum tariffs, followed by the GSP revocation, created a ripple effect, souring the trade atmosphere and setting the stage for a good old-fashioned trade tiff. It was a clear signal that the old rulebook was being rewritten, or perhaps just aggressively scribbled over with a very large marker pen. This period was characterized by a distinct America First policy, which, while perhaps appealing to a domestic audience, often translated into a you're-on-your-own message for trading partners. For India, it meant navigating a trade environment that was suddenly less predictable and more contentious. The established mechanisms of dialogue and negotiation seemed to take a back seat to unilateral actions and public declarations. It was a challenging time, forcing India to reassess its trade strategies and prepare for a potentially rockier road ahead in its most significant economic partnership. It felt less like a negotiation, and more like being told the new rules of a game you'd been playing for years. So, America throws a tariff punch. What does India do? Well, it doesn't just sit there and take it on the chin. In June 2019, after a period of hoping for a resolution that didn't quite materialize, India decided it was time for its own retaliatory tariffs. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was a carefully calibrated response targeting 28 specific US products. We're talking about increased duties on items like almonds, apples, walnuts, chickpeas, and certain chemical and metal products. Essentially, if you were an American almond farmer eyeing the lucrative Indian market, things suddenly got a bit more expensive for your buyers. The economic impact of these tit-for-tat tariffs was felt on both sides, as is usually the case in these trade skirmishes. American exporters of the targeted goods faced reduced competitiveness in the Indian market. Those delicious Californian almonds, for instance, suddenly became pricier for Indian consumers and food processors, potentially leading them to look for alternative sources or simply buy less. For Indian importers, it meant higher costs, which could then be passed on to consumers, or absorbed, squeezing their profit margins. It's the classic trade war conundrum. You try to protect your own, but in doing so, you often end up making things more difficult for everyone involved, including your own citizens. The sectors affected were quite diverse. On the US side, agricultural products were prominently featured in India's retaliatory list, a politically sensitive area in America. This was likely a strategic move by India, aiming to put pressure on US policymakers by hitting them where it hurts in their constituencies. On the Indian side, the initial US tariffs on steel and aluminum impacted its metal manufacturing industries, forcing them to either absorb the costs, find new markets, or become less competitive in the US. It became a complicated dance of trying to inflict just enough economic discomfort to bring the other side to the negotiating table, without causing irreparable damage to your own economy. This period of retaliatory measures underscored the delicate balance in international trade. While tariffs can be used as a tool to protect domestic industries or as leverage in negotiations, they also risk escalating into broader trade disputes that harm overall economic growth. For businesses, it created an environment of uncertainty, making long-term planning a bit like trying to predict the monsoon. You know it's coming, but the intensity and timing are always a gamble. The retaliation rhapsody was a clear indication that India, while valuing its trade relationship with the US, was also prepared to assert its interests when it felt unfairly targeted. It was a polite yet firm "we can play this game too." Then came 2021, and with it, a new administration in the White House. The Biden team signaled a desire to move away from the more confrontational trade policies of its predecessor and re-engage with international partners, including India. There was a palpable sense of cautious optimism, a hope that perhaps the tariff tensions could be dialed down and a more collaborative approach could be re-established. It wasn't an immediate flick of a switch, mind you, these things take time, like waiting for a truly good cup of filter coffee to brew. But the intent, at least, seemed to be there for a reset in trade relations. A significant step in this direction came during Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to the US in June 2023. Both nations announced an agreement to terminate 6 outstanding disputes at the World Trade Organization, WTO. As part of this, India agreed to remove retaliatory tariffs on certain US products, including those chickpeas, lentils, almonds, walnuts, and apples that had been targeted earlier. This was a big deal. It was like both sides agreeing to put down their economic cudgels and actually talk things through. The US, for its part, also made concessions, signaling a mutual willingness to de-escalate the lingering trade friction. Beyond just rolling back some tariffs, there were also efforts to institutionalize dialogue and cooperation. Initiatives like the India-US Trade Policy Forum, TPF, were reinvigorated. The TPF is basically a platform for the two countries to sit down and hash out their trade and investment issues, covering everything from agriculture and intellectual property to services and digital trade. Think of it as couples counseling, but for international trade. Another key initiative launched was the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies, ICET, aimed at fostering collaboration in high-tech areas like AI, quantum computing, and semiconductors, which, while not directly about tariffs, helps build a stronger, more integrated economic relationship. These moves under the Biden administration were seen as a positive development, a concerted effort to steer the Indo-US trade ship back into calmer waters. The focus shifted, at least in rhetoric, towards finding common ground and resolving disputes through dialogue rather than unilateral actions. Of course, not all issues magically disappeared overnight. Deep-seated differences remained, but the willingness to engage, to dismantle some of the more recent trade barriers, and to look for areas of mutual benefit marked a distinct change in tone and, to some extent, in substance, from the preceding years. It was an attempt to rebuild bridges, one trade agreement at a time. Section 5. The current tariff tangle navigating the labyrinth of duties. So, even with some de-escalation efforts under the Biden administration, what did the tariff landscape look like just before the very latest flurry of announcements in May 2025? Well, let's just say it wasn't exactly a tariff-free utopia. Many duties remained firmly in place, particularly on agricultural goods, automobiles and auto parts, and certain electronics. India, historically, has maintained relatively high average tariffs compared to many other large economies. This is often justified as a measure to protect its vast domestic agricultural sector and nascent manufacturing industries from foreign competition. It's a policy of make in India, but sometimes with a side of tax if made elsewhere. The United States, for its part, continued to push for greater market access for its products, especially in these protected Indian sectors. American agricultural exporters, for example, have long eyed India's massive consumer base but faced significant tariff barriers and other non-tariff hurdles like complex sanitary and phytosanitary regulations. Similarly, U.S. technology companies and manufacturers of renewable energy equipment were keen for a more level playing field. It's the classic dilemma. One country's protectionism is another country's trade barrier, and this dynamic kept the trade negotiators busy, constantly trying to find a middle path. Specific sectors that remained hotspots for tariffs included automobiles, where India imposes high import duties, much to the chagrin of international car manufacturers. Auto components also faced significant tariffs. On the agricultural front, items beyond those where retaliatory tariffs were removed still faced considerable import duties. And in electronics, while India encourages local manufacturing through schemes like PLI or production-linked incentive, imported finished goods often attract customs duties. This intricate web of tariffs meant that businesses on both sides had to be adept at navigating a complex regulatory environment, factoring in these costs when making import-export decisions. This existing tariff structure, even before the recent developments, formed the backdrop against which all trade talks took place. It highlighted the different economic philosophies and domestic compulsions at play. India's need to safeguard the livelihoods of millions of farmers and support its domestic industry often clashed with the U.S. objective of promoting its exports and ensuring fair market access for its companies. These weren't just technical disagreements over percentages, they were reflections of fundamentally different priorities and development strategies, making any comprehensive resolution a truly Herculean task for a long time. Section 6. Deja vu all over again. Trump, tariffs, and a no-tariff twist. And just when you thought the trade narrative was settling into a predictable rhythm of slow negotiations and incremental progress, bam! May 2025 arrives, and with it, a plot twist worthy of a Bollywood blockbuster, courtesy of none other than former, and potentially future, U.S. President Donald Trump. On May 15, 2025, Mr. Trump announced that India had, apparently, offered a trade deal with, get this, no tariffs for American goods. Yes, you heard that right, no tariffs. That's like saying a Mumbai monsoon will arrive with no rain. It sounds almost too good, or perhaps too simplistic to be true. This rather dramatic announcement came on the heels of a 90-day pause on tariff hikes that Trump had declared on April 9, 2025. So, the stage was set for some intense negotiations, with New Delhi reportedly eager to finalize this deal within this 3-month window. The very idea of a no-tariffs deal is frankly mind-boggling given the historical context of high Indian tariffs and the complexity of previous trade disputes. It represents a potentially massive shift though, as always with such pronouncements, the devil is likely hiding somewhere in the very, very fine print, possibly laughing. Following Trump's comments,